Hi, everyone. Before we start this week, we wanted to take a moment to dedicate this episode to Sasha Jenkins, the journalist and celebrated filmmaker behind Louis Armstrong's Black and Blues, who was taken from us this week way too soon. He will be missed, and we just wanted to take a moment to recognize him and send our condolences to his fans, his friends, and his family. Hello and welcome to episode 170 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. Sigmund, how's your week been?
It's been good. A little bit of background on this episode. This is the second time we're recording it. So it's not all been good, but a highlight this week was during Memorial Weekend, being able to finally see the latest Mission Impossible on a big IMAX screen. Incredible experience, and I'm really lucky to be able to have that kind of experience theatrically. Totally get that. But there's something a little bit missing from the international theatrical experience that I want to delve into. Not the experience itself, the sounds, the visual element, fantastic. But up until a recent announcement, something that had really been American only. I mean, Japan have these incredible printed tickets with amazing artwork that collectors, try and grab on eBay after the fact. I wish we had that kind of thing on both sides of the Atlantic. But one thing that's very American, which has been something that I've always been a little jealous of, is popcorn buckets. This is something completely new to me, to be quite honest with you. And I think over the last maybe few years, popcorn buckets have become more and more extravagant and weird and memeable at times. We had that Dune popcorn bucket where you had to literally put your hand down the worm to get the popcorn. But for the very first time this week, Regal Cinemas announced a popcorn bucket and the first Apple original tie-in popcorn bucket for F1 the movie. You and I, we've both seen pictures of the bucket shaped as the APX GP helmet in gold and black. But we've got some breaking news, because whilst the Europeans normally get left out of these kind of shenanigans, we're going to have a popcorn bucket of our own, but it's going to be black and white.
Yeah, when you sent me this news segment, I said, oh, well, that's great because you'll be able to get one closer to home and won't have to spend quite as much money. And your response was, well, no, now there's two colors, so there's twice as many to collect. Yeah, this is really cool to see that an Apple original is getting in on the trend of the popcorn buckets. I agree with you. It's kind of grown over the past few years. I feel like we're getting back to the days in like the late 90s, early 2000s when TV promotional items were everywhere. I remember the Taco Bell drink cups for Star Wars The Phantom Menace, getting a Jar Jar Binks cup with the straw coming out of the top of his head. That was the peak in the heyday for me. But yeah, I love this return to the idea of these collectible promotional items for films. I think the popcorn buckets, it just creates a little bit of an extra anticipation for a film, because in addition to the trailers and the posters and getting to see the film itself, now there's this other element that you can speculate on and look forward to finding out what it's going to look like. Now, of course, these things are pretty expensive. And I think the Apex helmet is, $60 at Regal if you purchase it outright, and then resale on eBay is, who knows what that's going to be. I have never gotten into the collection trend with these because my local cinema doesn't super participate in the collectible bucket. Sometimes they'll have ones with like printed artwork from the film, but not the funnily shaped ones where you have to reach into the creature's mouth or whatever. So this may be my first one that I'm collecting. There is a Regal probably about 3 hours from me, So it'd be a little bit of a trek, but to get the popcorn bucket and get to experience F1 on a huge screen like that, it may be worth it.
I'm going to make a call and just say, any listeners with a Regal Cinema near you, if you're willing to grab a popcorn bucket, do get in touch with us. And I'll make it worth your while to ship one over for me so I can get both. And maybe we can do a trade. But I'm very, very excited for this. Of course, popcorn's very different on both sides of the Atlantic, right? We have sweet and salted, although my go-to is to have a mix of the two, but not throw anything in there. I know in America, you kind of throw droplets in there and chocolates, and I believe the traditional way is to pour butter all over the popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
And my question with the butter is, how on earth do you clean, especially like a complex popcorn bucket like the Apex GP helmet? How on earth do you clean that?
Well, that's the thing. I think if I bought one, I would ask them not to put popcorn in it and maybe get a separate popcorn container because, yeah, as much as it's fun to eat out of them, if you're really trying to collect it, I don't know how you'd get all the grease and butter out of it. It's just a very American thing altogether, Sigmund, but I'm happy that you're going to get to participate in it as well with the Apex helmet.
I feel like one kind of missed opportunity for tie-ins and merch was the studio and it not having its own popcorn bucket based on the franchise that obviously Continental Studios get their hands on early on in the series. We'll be recapping that series altogether later on in this episode. But we begin this episode with our Apple TV and immersive highlight for the week, Bono, Stories of Surrender.
This vivid reimagining of Bono's critically acclaimed one-man stage show pulls back the curtain on a remarkable life and the family, friends, and faith that have challenged and sustained him on his journey as a son, father, husband, activist, and rock star.
Hola! Welcome to my quarter-man show. Turns out the most extraordinary thing about my life is I met my wife, Ali. Same week, I joined you too. It's a beautiful day. I was born with my fists up. Surrender does not come easy to me. These are the tall tales of a short rock star. You don't need it now. I'm going to have a very strong drink. You don't have to laugh, actually.
Now, this is based on Bono's 2022 autobiography, Surrender, and the live show that followed it, directed by Andrew Dominic from Radical Media and Plan B Entertainment, and the first feature-length film available in Apple Immersive Video. We've had many questions since the announcement of this dual release, now available both in 2D across all of your screens and in the Apple Immersive Video format exclusive to Apple Vision Pro. How would the rollout work? Were they indeed the same length and the same film? And how would it feel to watch an essentially black and white feature-length film in Apple Immersive Video? And we had so many more questions as well. But before we get to answering those questions and giving our opinions, here's a few interesting details shared with us by our good friends at Apple. Firstly, Bono and his creative team actually came up with the idea to share his story in two unique ways as the project was being conceived, which I think is a really important detail here, because Apple Vision Pro just launched and the creative team had experienced Apple Immersive Video, which then gave them the creative clarity to use the format to enhance the experience and offer Bono's story in a new way by essentially making the 1 hour 26-minute feature film twice, once in 2D and again in Apple Immersive Video. The challenge is going to be, of course, to think of creative ways to tell Bono's story in an impactful way that worked for two unique viewing experiences. And I think they've done that. Bono and his creative team and Apple, of course, used Apple Immersive Video cameras to capture Bono's performances. allowing the immersive edition of the film to offer a uniquely intimate experience compared to the 2D version, because you're literally joining such a legend on stage as he performs several popular U2 songs. Another key element for the immersive edition was to go back to Bono's book and highlight the connection between his art and the narration of his journey. Now, his book has lots of different illustrations, and even the cover before the book got changed to Stories of Surrender. The cover for Surrender had this yellow font handwritten, as you'll see in the TV app listings for this documentary experience. And to kind of bring that to life, Bono used the Procreate app on iPad Pro with Apple Pencil Pro to create the illustrations that add an extra layer of unique expression in the immersive edition of the film, with those illustrations then brought to life through immersive effects by New York-based VFX production house The Artery, whose work has appeared in so many exceptional projects and some recent favourites of ours, from Apple Originals, Palm Royale and Causeway, to other recent favourites including Beau is Afraid, A Real Pain, and I Saw the TV Glow. Now, we'll get into how those technical elements, of course, build upon and enhanced our experiences, as well as what this dual release example means for the future of Apple Immersive releases. But as always, we like to begin with how the experience made us feel. Personally, Devon, I feel wiser for having experienced this intimate exploration into so many different things. You've got art, philanthropy, family, faith. But how did it make you feel? And was it at all what you expected going in?
I had trouble setting my expectations going in because I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this. This is something totally different from what I usually check out. I've actually never even been to a one-man show in person, Sigmund, which might be surprising given how much time I spend in theaters. But so this was actually my first experience of that format at all. And then, of course, you added the immersive element as well, and it was just totally different from anything I'd experienced before. But I'd say it was really touching to see these stories delivered so powerfully by Bono, who's obviously just a born performer. And from the very first moments, you see this is a performance that he's putting on. While he is in some ways just being himself and telling his story, and there are some interactions with the audience that are quite engaging and funny as well, he also has put a lot of thought and care into how these stories are told and into making them as impactful as possible. And so watching it play out, I'm not super familiar with Bono's life story. I know about his works through U2 and through the Red campaign for the most part, but getting to see exactly how he started, hearing more about his family life, and how he went from this young man who felt so unseen to one of the biggest rock stars in the world and doing all these things and, trying to make an impact for the world. It was really cool to see, to go on that journey with him. He takes a mostly chronological approach for the most part, minus the intro, which really just throws you into the middle of his story in a very dramatic way. But he's just really narrating his life from birth to this point. And he stops every once in a while to just sing some songs about that point in his life and what he was working on. So you get the history of U2 and their first hits, and then as they grew. And so I really enjoyed just going on that journey with him. I thought the chronological layout worked really well, but also pausing for the music and then the reflections, especially at the end of the different things that he's learned along the way and where he is at now and how he looks back on his life differently now than he used to, but also the things that he's doing now and how he accepts where he's at with all the questions and things that he's puzzled through. Yeah, I thought it was very impactful as well. The word wiser that you use, I think it inspires me to be that. I don't know that I've gotten there, but it makes me want to ask some of those questions, especially around world events, poverty, the things that we could do in that sense. I thought he really brought up some great points there.
I mean, when I use the word wiser, I think wise isn't necessarily just associated with knowledge, but it's associated with the idea of being able to open yourself up to those questions and seek the answers, which is one of the big elements to this that I got. So I just wanted to kind of clarify there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think part of what Bono is trying to do here is not just make it about himself. It is very much his story, and it is a one-man show, so it has a lot of those elements as well. You know, you're watching this one person with props on stage performing and using different elements there to try to convey some of these experiences. But at the end of the day, I think it's less about just sharing his story and more about sharing what he's learned and trying to pass it on to people and take some of his mistakes, but also some of the good things that he's done. And he has certainly done some good things, and inspire other people to carry on and do those things as well. So he doesn't shy away from the darker sides of his history and even some of the decisions that he's made that he's not necessarily proud of. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. What I came away from it with was feeling inspired to open myself up to those questions and try to tackle them in a way that I can be someone who makes an impact on the world as well.
Now, I know one of the questions you had coming in was well, is this whole thing going to be in black and white predominantly? And also, how are we going to feel if this is an hour and 26 minutes, like the 2D version, which it was? How are we going to feel afterwards? Because as much as I enjoyed Submerged, which was incredible when I checked it out, I felt incredibly fatigued. This felt very, very different.
It had a very different feel to Submerged, I will say, and that's clear from the very first moment. I guess, came in knowing that the format was going to be a little bit different because there was a preview in the TV app, a few minutes just to get a feel for the film and get ready for it. And what we learned from that first look was that this film was not entirely in immersive video format, at least not the way we've conceived it so far and understood it. So you're not spending the entire hour and 26 minutes, which is in black and white, completely watching Bono in the immersive format, walking across the stage and things like that. It alternates between 2D, presented in what kind of looks like a cinema environment, but just with a black background, which I think speaks to the incredible blacks of the Vision Pro's displays, that it really feels like you're just in a kind of a void watching this 2D screen. And then it blends in the three-dimensional elements as you go along. You mentioned the handwriting, the drawings that Bono did in Procreate. And what they do is they break out of the video box to create a depth effect. And so while the video that you're watching most of the time is the 2D footage that I think is probably shared from the 2D version of the film for a lot of it, you're also seeing these elements pop out at you and swirl around. Sometimes you are having to turn your head to take in all the text and illustrations, and it's reinforcing what Bono is saying and doing in a way that creates this really cool effect. Now, there are select music performances actually filmed and displayed in immersive video, so you do get some of that experience as well. I think it was smart to stick with the music performances for those segments because that is a format that Apple has done quite a bit and has pretty much nailed down, and audiences are used to seeing those musical performances in that way. And so it's great to see Bono when he leans out in front of the stage. You see that, you get that effect, and you get those close-up effects as well. The really innovative thing that I thought in terms of blending the 2D and the 3D, though, is there are some scenes where they film Bono and he's in front of a black background on the stage that he's on, and they're able to segment out the video a little bit so that they can put some of the illustrations behind him and around him in a way that creates a 3D effect from the 2D video. So it's not one thing or the other. It's a lot of things combined into this one film, but the impact overall that you get away from it is this immersive experience that you get to spend time in for an hour and 26 minutes. And I'll say, at least for me, coming out of it, I didn't feel fatigued by the end of it because you're not just in the immersive the entire time. You're getting 3D elements other ways as well.
Talking of illustrations, one of the things that I really loved was the illustrated crowds and how they're superimposed on. Of course, there's a live crowd as well during this performance, but I love the illustrations that also serve as transitions between the different formats.
Yeah, I think that is a challenge when you're integrating different formats into a single video. How do you get from one to the other? But I felt like this film did a great job of never making a transition that was so abrupt that you didn't know where you were. I think because the whole thing does have a three-dimensionality to it, when it transitions into immersive video, you're not surprised. You're just more immersed in the world, and you could look around a little bit more and get that full 3D effect of seeing him on stage. But when it switches back to the 2D, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're missing out on anything, and it does a good job of moving you between those. And there are different ways that they play with those transitions and making sure that the viewer is on board and not confused at any point. So I thought that was really effective and well done. Again, this is the first of anything we've seen like this, so I'm sure there are other ways that it could be done, but this is a first effort I think was really well put together, and one that I hope we see more of. And it makes me honestly want to see immersive enhanced versions of other films. I think other 2D films could release versions like this with the extra effects coming out at you. You wouldn't even necessarily need the immersive footage. You could make a whole new experience. What I was thinking about was, of course, my favorite film of all time, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, because there's a moment when there's a bass line during one of the songs that Bono's performing, and some of those electric charges are coming out at you from the screen, and that is a lot of the effect that you see on Scott Pilgrim during the music, but to actually see it in 3D coming out of the screen, I think that would be really cool. So I think this is actually a format that could work a lot of different ways, and I hope we see it explored some more.
Yeah, I mean, over the last week, of course, I went to IMAX to see Mission Impossible. Incredible, right? And of course, there are certain scenes that are filling the whole IMAX format, and then go back to 2:35:1, for example. And on a big screen, it's not jarring. But when you see that same kind of format change happen at home, maybe on your TV, it may be, right? I watched, again, Oppenheimer recently, and I noticed how it was a little bit jarring if you're on a regular sized screen. Of course, Apple Vision Pro doesn't have that issue because we've got an IMAX screen on our face, right? And so I think they are using and learning a lot from that format. And it wouldn't surprise me if at some point there is some kind of collaboration between what IMAX are doing and what Apple are doing, and where they could possibly make things work, not just for Apple Vision Pro users, but maybe Apple Immersive Video also has an impact going the other way to 2D screenings as well in big theatres. I think that's the biggest surprise about all of this, is that Apple's immersive video and this Bono Stories of Surrender documentary, performance, whatever you want to call it, feature film, I feel like is Apple Immersive Video's IMAX moment. We've really only looked at immersive video up until now from a purely 180-degree video experience. We've also talked about how the technology is trickling down to filmmakers, but wholly it's still kind of unattainable from a multicam setup perspective if you're going to include multiple Blackmagic immersive cameras in a filmmaker's arsenal. That filmmaker's probably going to have to have been established or got out a pretty big sizable bank loan, right, and be able to do his own rentals and everything on the side. This example of immersive video kind of feels adaptable on so many levels, and I think it opens up the format to both indie filmmakers and established studios that haven't quite figured out where immersive video fits in their production workflow, or even the audience's tolerance beyond a 30-minute runtime, which again was one of our worries going in. This, I think, is a proof of concept that immersive video done in this way will work really well. And again, like, I'm totally with you on this. I want to see future Apple Immersive Video iterations on some of our favourite films. Scott Pilgrim's a great one, but the Godzilla films, you know, there's already a relationship there. Ghostbusters, Apocalypse Now. I mean, you could really go the full gamut, but this is what I wanted to see. And this is something actually not that long ago I hinted at. Do you remember when we were talking ahead of Apple Vision Pro coming, and we just had the demos of immersive video, and we were kind of wondering, well, could we adapt this to older films? I think that's the answer, because Apocalypse Now was an example I gave online, and I think like a couple of people said, I don't think you quite understand immersive video, and maybe there's a little bit of a lost in translation there. But this is what I kind of envisioned, and I really hope that Apple are able to kind of go to full hog.
I agree with you. I hope this is the beginning of a trend of these kinds of films, and I hope that we can talk about many, many more of them in the future on the show. But whether you watch it in 2D or immersive video, we highly recommend checking out Bono's Stories of Surrender. It's a great film with some wonderful musical performances and some takeaways that all of us would do well to be thinking on. Bono's Stories of Surrender is now streaming on Apple TV Plus and Apple Vision Pro, with a first look at the immersive experience now available to view in-store as part of Apple Vision Pro demos starting today.
Some other kind of storytelling moves happening from Apple this week. And we're going to start this week with the announcement of Apple's acquisition of indie game studio RAC7, the duo behind Apple Arcade hit Sneaky Sasquatch, which started as this very small adventure and then just turned into almost a open world experience where you could do so much. Hey, you could even get your Sneaky Sasquatch to go to work and start building. This is, of course, Apple's first purchase of a game studio. Comes on the heels of the rumoured launch of a games app this fall, which I think we're going to be getting into a little bit more come our WWDC predictions on next week's episode. But this is a good first move, right?
Yeah, this is really cool to see. Sneaky Sasquatch is one of those games that constantly comes up when Apple talks about arcade as just a big success on the platform. It was a launch title. It stuck with it throughout its run, which a lot of titles have gone away from the service since it launched. So that's great to see. And to see that Apple is choosing to continue to invest in the game to make sure it has a future on the service, I think it speaks to Apple's commitment to the service and hopefully a bright future for it. So some great news there. Very interesting to see Apple getting into the game studio space.
I think it's really interesting in this regard, Devon, and stop me if you've heard this before, but we've always looked at Apple Arcade and Apple's gaming aspirations as something kind of that's always gone halfway. This is very different because I think this is the first time that Apple are buying a game studio, and therefore they're going to focus on their own original games. And how does that work in terms of community? And it almost feels like Apple could go down the Nintendo route. Of course, they don't have the IP that Nintendo have worked generations to acquire, but you need something. You need a central piece, really, to be able to build that and build the community that modern day gaming exists around. So there's a lot more here than just a simple acquisition, I think.
And it'll be interesting to see which route they go with, if this is just to support the one game or if they're going to try to create other games within the RAC7 world. We'll just have to wait and see what exactly it looks like, but I think this is good news all around. There are a couple of third-party apps we want to shout out this week, starting with developer Vidit Bhargava, developer of dictionary app Lookup, who has launched its spin-off Word of the Day on Apple TV this week. Available for a one-time purchase of $9.99, the app features a new word to learn each day alongside a beautiful custom graphic that you can now view on the biggest screen in your home. This is a very cool app to see come to Apple TV. Vidit did a blog post about bringing the app to Apple TV and how quick it was thanks to SwiftUI and his approach to development. And yeah, I think this is a great addition to your big screen. If you used to have one of those word a day calendars, now you can just do it on your Apple TV and expand your vocabulary every day.
I mean, if you have and if you use your Apple TV in an automation in the morning, maybe this is like the perfect startup app. You get your word of the day, and then you're onto your fitness routine before, of course, the news comes on, or whatever else, maybe just a bit of YouTube. But yeah, this is perfect, and it's really nice to see this kind of app finally make it to the big screen. Talking of big screens, though, there's no bigger screen than the one that we put on our face. Sometimes it feels like we are in a theatre. And one app in particular with that name does probably the best job of them all at replicating that experience.
Yeah, Theater for Vision Pro from Sandwich, an app that we're big fans of, doing a lot of really creative things in that space. And it had its third major release this week with new planetarium and giant screen titles, as well as support for watching titles with up to 32 friends with a single purchase via SharePlay, which is a great implementation of the technology and awesome that you can watch these titles with other people. If you want to do them with personas, I think you're limited to 4 people, but without personas, you can have up to 32 people watching these just massive films together, and that's very, very cool.
Very, very cool. And hopefully at some point they're able to integrate back into the TV app as well. I don't know if that's a Sandwich decision or an Apple decision, but conversations are ongoing. Last year, we got a live broadcast of the talk show with John Gruber. No doubt that will be happening again this year, although I've heard no news on that and whether that's happening both virtually or live. We'll have to wait and see. But talking of theatres and Apple Vision Pro, one of the things that we talked about a long, long time ago when Schmigadoon was going through its second season on Apple TV Plus was a new format in which Schmigadoon could live on, and that is through theatre, and possibly a theatrical rendition coming to Apple Vision Pro at some point in the future. Something that I think now we've seen Bono's Stories of Surrender makes more and more sense. Well, this week we learnt of further rollout for the Schmigadoon theatre adaptation, this time by way of Broadway Video and No Guarantees Productions, who presented a New York City reading of Schmigadoon, which had its world premiere earlier this year at the Kennedy Center. Premiere we hoped to have attended in person, but didn't quite get to it. New York City maybe is next on the map for us, Devon. The reading starred two-time Tony nominee Alex Brightman as Josh Skinner and Sarah Chase as Melissa Gimbel, of course the two New York doctors who go backpacking in a last-ditch attempt to save their failing relationship, but instead get lost in the woods and end up trapped in Schmigadoon, a magical town that's a classic Golden Age musical come to life. They were joined by an array of stars from the stage, and I gotta say, I'm just really, really looking forward to seeing this further expand and whatever else could come. I really do feel that this is a show and an experience that really could do a complete 360, or is that 180?
They do immersive video, they'll have to cut it in half, Sigmund, but regardless of how, I really do want to experience this show. I hope they get a film version in immersive video for Apple Vision Pro, or maybe even on Apple TV Plus in 2D and immersive video. Maybe keep that hybrid approach going. But I'd also love to see them take this show on the road and do a traveling version of Schmigadoon, bring it to different cities across the U.S. and, of course, across the world, so more audiences can experience this show live, which I think would be amazing. We'll keep our fingers crossed for the future of Schmigadoon the musical, but for now, let's talk about the future of Apple Originals, because we got some great trailers this week.
We do. 3 trailers, starting with the Buccaneers and its return of a group of fun-loving young American girls exploding into the tightly corseted London of the 1870s, setting hearts racing and kicking off an Anglo-American culture clash. But now, in its sophomore season, the Buccaneers are no longer the invaders. England is their home. In fact, they're practically running the place.
Theo and I are happy. You can say that we are nothing. I have to let Guy go. But you know the truth.
The most important person in our lives is each other.
If these last few days have made me understand anything, we need to fight for the people we love. Don't we?
You know I hate to say it, I told you so.
Created and written by Catherine Jakeways, based on the novel of Edith Wharton, and starring an ensemble cast that we're going to get into because there's a lot of returns and there's one face in particular that I know you're excited about. Of course, accompanied once again by a soundtrack assembled by executive music producer Stella Mozgawa, featuring Chappelle Roan, Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, Sabrina Carpenter, Gracie Abrams, Empress of, and more. This is a show that I know you enjoyed the first time round. I've already talked about how I feel about period pieces most of the time. This is a lot more fun than, I guess, someone chasing a wheel with a stick, which is just what I have in my head when it comes to period pieces. But this has an energy that I think a lot of people really love. You do especially. And we're getting more of it this time round.
Yeah, I'm so excited that the Buccaneers is back for a second season. Watching the first season, I got very much Dickinson vibes in the way that it's a period piece, but with a modern soundtrack. And it looks like they're continuing that for the second season, which I think is great. So I'm excited that it's coming back, that we get to spend more time with these characters. Of course, based on the trailer, it seems like the majority of the season is going to, again, focus on the love triangle between Nan, played by Christine Froseth, Guy, played by Matthew Broome, and Theo, played by Guy Rimmers. We thought that was resolved at the end of last season, but of course, a good love triangle never dies, Sigmund, and it's going to continue on. We're also going to get some time with Guy and Dan's sister Jenny, played by Imogen Waterhouse, and her precarious situation as she continues to run away from her awful husband, who I hope stubs his toe every single morning, and I hope we see some very bad things happen to him this season. That might be terrible, but if you've seen the show, just not a good dude, and I'm hoping to see Jenny continue on her run away from him. Of course, we've got the other Buccaneers as well, Conchita, Lizzie, and Mabel, who are continuing on their journeys as well. Looking forward to spending more time with them. But then, of course, the big twist at the end of the trailer, which was also the big twist at the end of season 1, is the reappearance of Nan's mother, who's going to be played by Leighton Meester, who will be an exciting addition for fans of Gossip Girl. So that's the unexpected element, in addition to the expected element of the love triangle and all the running and things like that. But I'm really looking forward to this season. I can't wait for it to kick off on June 18th on Apple TV+.
Coming June 27th is Smoke, and it also received its first trailer this week when an arson investigator begrudgingly teams up with a police detective. The race to stop two arsonists ignites a twisted game of secrets and suspicions.
I have 2 serial arsonists working this area. No significant leads on either.
You need to get somebody quick before one of them kills again.
What's the motive?
Serial arsonists tend to be powerless in their own lives. They want other people to know what that feels like. Whatever you do, whatever you know, fire puts a light to it all.
This one comes to us from Apple Studios. It's created, written, and executive produced by Dennis Lehane, based on true events and inspired by Truth Media's acclaimed Firebug podcast. It stars a returning Taron Egerton alongside Journey Smollett, with an ensemble cast including Rafe Spall, Natugama Mubaho Mwine, Hannah Emily Anderson, Anna Klumpsky, Adina Porter, Greg Kinnear, and John Leguizamo. I'm going to say this straight off the bat. This is coming from the same team that brought us Blackbird, which included a remarkable performance, not just from Paul Walter Hauser, but also Taron Egerton, who stars in this, also starred in Tetris, which I think is completely underrated in terms of performance. And this is a show that honestly just should put Taron Egerton on another level. That said, I was really surprised by this trailer, how interested I was and how captivated I was by Journey Smollett and that role, because we're talking about a arson investigator and a police detective working together, yet they seem to have a suspicion of one another. And we are talking about 2 arsonists that they're investigating. And I don't know anything because I have not seen the show. But the first thing I thought was, what if they were the arsonists?
Like, what if they're both doing it but don't know the other is the one that's up to it? Yeah, that would make for a really interesting story. I mean, it seems like based on the trailer, really anything is possible, and I imagine it's going to be some time before we find out the truth, but I'm excited for the journey of discovering this mystery with these two. Of course, Taron Egerton just can't help but just be so suave in every role that he's in, and even when he's playing this grumpy detective, he's still got that grin, and I'm excited to see him in this role and really anything that he performs in. Jurnee Smollett is actually someone that I've been watching on screen since I was a child. She was on Full House as a child actor, and she and her family have always been involved with, acting in Hollywood, and she's someone that I've been a fan of. She was also on Friday Night Lights, another of my favorite series. So who knows, maybe we'll add Smoke to the list of Jurnee Smollett series that makes my top lists of all time. But either way, we're going to start to find out when the series premieres June 27th on Apple TV+.
And, if the marketing team need another tagline, there's no smoke without fire.
Our final trailer for this week is one that we've been hearing about for quite some time. We finally got our first look. It's a teaser for Chief of War. Based on true events and told from a native perspective, this historical drama tells the story of the unification of the Hawaiian Islands through the eyes of Kaiana, who joins a bloody campaign to unite the warring kingdoms in order to save them from the threat of colonization.
E ike ana oi ike ko ana o ka wānana e kai ana. Nau e imi ke ana.
Are you still the chief who desires peace over war?
Aole ke iala.
Starring, written, and executive produced by Jason Momoa, co-created by Momoa and Thomas Pras-Sabet, the series also stars Lucien Buchanan, Tamara Morrison, and several others. Sigmund, having seen this trailer, getting a glimpse of what the series is all about, what did you think?
I was pretty much blown away by this. Now, I'm not saying it strayed too far away from my expectations, given what we've seen Jason Momoa in before, especially when it comes to Apple Originals, and of course a lot of that team are also involved in this. But cinematography throughout was one of the stickouts for me on this teaser. Of course, the two primary cinematographers for this project are Matthew Chuang and Michael Sneeman. I think the trailer, it met expectations, and of course comparisons are easy to make, but this appears to be more focused from the outset given the historical and less fantastical roots of the series. Also, I'm almost certain this project was introduced as a limited mini-series, but these expectations may have changed following Apple TV's latest press release noting season finale rather than series finale in relation to Jason Momoa's directorial role on the final episode of this upcoming Apple original. So they were kind of my thoughts visually, but I think we also need to give mention to the soundtrack that we get a little glimpse at. Hans Zimmer wrote the theme for the show. I don't know if that's what is in the trailer, but what we also know is that he co-produced and co-wrote the score for all 9 episodes with British composer James Everingham. So that's reason enough for me to get excited for this. But as a fan of C, all 3 seasons now available on Apple TV+. What did you think of this first look?
I thought it looked incredible. Of course, a series set in Hawaii is going to be gorgeous, and it definitely is. But what excites me about this project more than anything is that it's a passion project for Jason Momoa, obviously. This is a story that's very personal and important to him, and it's an opportunity to tell a story that a lot of people don't know. I personally am not familiar with the history of Hawaii and the way the different groups came together in the wake of colonization. I think that's one that's worth telling, worth people hearing about. And of course, Jason Momoa is also just an incredible action star. He's going to do a great job with the battle scenes and that kind of thing as well. And you've got that intense moment right at the end of the trailer where he says, "Not today." And yeah, I thought that all worked really well. I'm excited to see this, and I think it's going to be An intense journey, but one that's going to be fun to go on when Chief of War debuts with its first 2 of 9 episodes, Friday, August 1st on Apple TV+.
And that isn't the only thing for us to look forward to, because going from a Apple original in Jason Momoa to another Apple original, of course, the 2019 launch that launched with C, For All Mankind, The Helpsters, but also the headline act, The Morning Show, which is returning for its 4th season. September 17th on Apple TV+, picking up 2 years after the events of Season 3, with the UBA-NBN merger complete. The newsroom must grapple with newfound responsibility, hidden motives, and the elusive nature of truth in a polarized America. In a world rife with deepfakes, conspiracy theories, and corporate cover-ups, who can you trust and how can you know what's actually real? Of course, Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon are returning in their starring roles alongside an incredible ensemble cast this season, with the welcome of Marion Cotillard, Jeremy Irons, and the return of Jon Hamm. So very, very cool to see that we're going to get more Jon Hamm between both seasons of Your Friends and Neighbours. We got our first look that we will link to, of course, in the show notes this week. But are you excited? And also, are you surprised? September 17th, literally creeping up the other side of summer.
When I saw the September 17th date, I thought, oh, that's so far away. And then I realized it's almost June. So no, it's not that far away. I think this is a great fall release. I mean, it's in line with what we've come to expect from the morning show. I'm excited to see more of it and spend more time in this world, find out what happens after the end of season 3, which ended in a very interesting place, let's say. So I'm excited for the time jump. And of course, I'm never going to say no to more Jon Hamm on our Apple TV Plus screen segments. So very much looking forward to season 4 of the morning show. In production news this week, filming is currently underway for Radical, an Apple Studios feature film from coda writer and director, as well as Academy Award winner Sean Hayter. The film tells the story of disability rights activist Judy Heumann and the 1977 sit-in and protest at the San Francisco Federal Building, where disabled individuals rallied to enforce Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Last week, Sigmund, of course, we covered Deaf President Now, an incredible film highlighting disability rights and an important moment in that history, and we said we want to see more. And it's great that just this next week we're seeing a story, not only a story from that history, but from such an acclaimed director as Sean Hayter, who already has such a rich history with Apple TV Plus between Coda and Little America. So this is really encouraging. This is exactly what we were hoping to see, and I can't wait to see this film when it does come out. Of course, it's just now filming, so we got some time to wait, but it's great that this story is going to be told in this way, and very, very exciting, not only for this film, but also just this trend we're seeing on Apple TV Plus of these kinds of stories being told.
Absolutely. Now, from one Academy Award-winning director to another, because Apple announced the 5-part documentary film portrait of Mr. Scorsese from director Rebecca Miller, behind the films She Came to Me and Personal Velocity, and executive producers Damon Cardasis and Cindy Tolan. This documentary series has been developed over a 5-year period, with the series featuring extensive conversations with Martin Scorsese, as well as his family, friends, and creative collaborators, in addition to items from his private archives. It's going to examine how his own colourful life experiences informed his artistic vision, as each film he made stunned the world with originality. And it starts with his New York University student films through to the present day, with the documentary exploring the themes that have fascinated Scorsese and informed his work, including the place of good and evil in the fundamental nature of humankind, which is very, very deep. And I'm really, really hopeful that we also get a look into, honestly, some of the work that I don't think he's as known for, his documentary work, but also his restoration work on films like The Red Shoes and others. Obviously, restoring them, bringing them to a new audience, and keeping film alive. You know, not just the blockbusters and the popcorn buckets, but the real kind of culture of filmmaking and cinematography and everything that revolves around it. So I'm very, very excited for this.
We've talked about Academy Award winners. We got one bit of awards news this week. The Peabody Awards winners were announced. And in the documentary category, an Apple original film, Bread and Roses, took away the prize. So congratulations there.
Now for some Apple TV releases. Of course, we're releasing a couple days later to mark the release of Bono, Stories of Surrender, which means quite a bit happened on Wednesday with a new episode of Carême and the finale to Government Cheese, as well as a packed MOS midweek game day, which featured 13 games from across the league in a week where a certain Cristiano Ronaldo is heavily tipped to be on course to reignite his rivalry with Inter Miami's Lionel Messi by joining the league. And Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez teamed up this week for an incredible goal for Inter Miami. So be on the lookout and check out highlights for Inter Miami's most recent game and all the games across the board, or watch the matches in full, whatever you choose, on MOS Season Pass. Today, of course, sees the premiere of our highlights, Bono, Stories of Surrender, and Bono, Stories of Surrender Immersive on Apple Vision Pro. And we've also got the premiere of Kids and Family feature, Lulu is a Rhinoceros, which I can't wait to dig into, alongside new episodes of Murderbot and Long Way Home, and the finale of a show that has stolen a lot of things, but especially our hearts. That is Your Friends and Neighbours. It would seem as though every family member of mine has been glued to this show, along with their friends, which is really, really interesting because these conversations are now coming out organically, whereas before it would be me recommending things. Now I'm having Apple Originals recommended to me. Very, very cool. But what about you, Devon? Has this been something you've been glued to week in, week out?
Oh, this has had a grip on my family from the beginning, Sigmund. We can't wait to find out what happens next. We're loving Your Friends and Neighbors and enjoying just everything about it. So happy that it's going to be back for a second season, but right now we're just enjoying the first season for all that it's worth, and I'm really happy that people are talking about it online as well, and according to the charts, it seems to be doing very, very well. So great series. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and catch up on it before the finale, because I promise it will be worth your time. Of course, Friday night on Apple TV Plus, we've got a double header between Boston Red Sox at Atlanta Braves at 7 p.m. Eastern and the New York Yankees at Los Angeles Dodgers at 10 p.m. Eastern. Saturday is MLS Game Day on MLS Season Pass, with Sunday seeing Sunday Night Soccer, Seattle versus Minnesota. Now free for DirecTV subscribers as well. Sunday Night Soccer just continues to expand, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out now and you're a DirecTV subscriber, now's your opportunity. And finally, for this week's releases, Monday sees the newest episode of Apple Original Podcast, Big Time, one that I know we've both been enjoying week to week and definitely worth checking out. In terms of extras this week, we've got our second month of these new sizzle reels that Apple's putting out for Apple Originals each month. What's coming in June 2025, including Stick, the Buccaneers, and more. A great glimpse into what's coming this next month. We've also got an inside look at Stick, and a few great extras for fans of Fountain of Youth, including Natalie Raps, but maybe not in the way you expect, Rick Steves searches for the Fountain of Youth, and Junket of Youth, which portrays the cast of Fountain of Youth after experiencing the effects of the fountain. A very cool extra. Loving what they're doing with all these extras for Apple Originals. Last up for extras this week, we've got the Severance Season 2 finale script, Cold Harbor, with a forward by Dan Erickson on Deadline. Deadline's doing a series of TV scripts from this past season. Great to see Severance included, and if you want to see the script that the amazing finale was based on, you can check that out on Deadline.
Very, very cool. And I've just learned something new. I actually thought the Fountain of Youth cast had just gone full method. So it's good to know that they were replaced and hadn't actually found a Fountain of Youth. And talking of method, last week saw the finale of The Studio, a show that we have loved every moment of, giving us an in-depth, I'd say, and heightened look at modern-day Hollywood through the eyes of Continental Studios and its new leader, Matt Remick, a newly appointed head of the movie studio, desperate for celebrity approval. He and his executive team at Continental Studios must juggle corporate demands with creative ambitions as they try to keep movies alive and relevant.
Hi, Charlize.
Get out of here.
Okay, sorry.
I've heard that you're obsessed with actors and directors liking you.
Me? That could not be further from the truth.
You have to give him the note. You have to.
You rule, man.
God, we are all so weak in the face of celebrity.
You two are weak in the face of...
Mr. Mackey, hi. How are you?
This series stars and is written and directed by Seth Rogen, created by Peter Hayek, Alex Gregory, Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Frida Perez, also starring Catherine O'Hara, Catherine Hahn, Ike Barinholtz, and Chase Three Wonders, with guest star appearances from Bryan Cranston, Kayla Monteroso Meyer, and Dwayne Perkins, along with many, many cameos. I'm going to say cameos galore because it literally starts and never stops. Lots of heightened renditions of some of film's most favourite and recognised stars and figureheads. Of course, the studio starts with Continental Studios having 10 flops ahead of Patty being fired and Matt coming in to take the Continental Studio throne. He's got to do this job whilst dodging the many pitfalls and trappings of 2025 Hollywood, including casting mistakes, political correctness, going too woke, and he's wanting to make art when the business is really all about commerce, at least traditionally, you know, popcorn buckets and franchise. It also touches on this very strange transitional period that Hollywood is in, where traditional studios are competing against the tidal wave that is big tech, and it's a really interesting depiction on how it's trying to navigate it, successfully or not. And the show is basically taking us on a ride with a bunch of degenerates, and I don't think that's a harsh thing to say given the double finale that we just experienced, Devon, whose, pure love of film has either already been corrupted or is being slowly chipped away. So, Devon, I don't think I've hidden the fact that this is my favourite series to debut across streaming this year. Is it yours?
It is definitely up there, Sigmund. This series is one I think we both knew we were in the target audience for it from the moment it was announced, because we're both film lovers and we're into this industry and we love following it and its ins and outs. And so I think that puts us squarely in at least the easiest audience for the studio, though I think it has a broader audience as well. But there are so many reasons that it appeals to people who love movies, including, as you said, the cameos, the homages, the references, even down to just the very title sequence and its reference to old Hollywood. There's so much going on here that film lovers can pick up on, little things that maybe other people would miss, but also I think there's an educational aspect to it too, where it's introducing other people to some of these elements as well and seeing what it's like behind the scenes, of course, in a fictional, heightened world, but there's nuggets of truth to every parody, right? I love getting to see that world, the literal film studio that they're working at, where they're riding around on golf carts, and it just feels very much old Hollywood in that way and very appealing in that sense. But then you've got Matt, the new studio head, who is someone you hope to see succeed because he's in the film industry and you want the film industry to thrive. But as a person, he's so pompous about the history of film and his role in it, at least the way he sees it. And it makes him really easy to laugh at. And I think we all know someone who is so passionate about something that they think that puts them on a different level than other people when it comes to that subject. And it makes them maybe more important in that area than they think. And we definitely get that from Matt throughout. He loves films almost to a fault. And it makes him both the perfect person for this job, but also the exact wrong person for studio head job. And so seeing him navigate that, he's definitely someone whose love of film is pure from the start, but as he learns more about how it all works and the decisions he has to make, it gets slowly chipped away. But it also speaks to the current moment in the industry, and I think that can be a cathartic experience for those of us who are watching it, but also, of course, people who are in it as well and living it each day. I think the way it touches on franchises, on streaming, on big tech, and more, including AI as well, which is a big hot topic in Hollywood. I think the way it touches on them in comedic ways, you're laughing, but it's also recognizing the realities of these situations. And I think that that's important. And coming from someone like Seth Rogen and his co-creators on the series, it makes sense that they would put their lived experiences into this in a way that's, while it's fictional and hilarious, it's also very honest. And I think that makes it really, really appealing to people who care about this industry.
I mean, I agree with you. The best comedy always stems from reality, right? And truth. And that, I think, is a really, really important thing here, because whilst it does explore these different subjects in a very, very funny way, it is at times crass. It is very cringeworthy to a kind of fault sometimes. Curb Your Enthusiasm, I mentioned last week, I Think You Should Leave, maybe not to that level because it's not a sketch show, but each episode has its own story and explores these different elements, not just in terms of a subject that needs to be tackled, but also from a stylistic point of view. I know going into the first episode, it's very heightened, and it is something that you almost need to prepare yourself for, and maybe even take a breather. I think I paused that debut episode once or twice, just because it was so loud and so squabbly and so energetic in ways that were stress-inducing. I could feel my vein kind of popping out of my head during that first episode. But once it starts to settle down, I think this is a show that, honestly, there's going to be episodes that I revisit again and again and again and again. Of course, we'll get into that in a moment and explore our favourite episodes and our favourite moments and characters. But beyond the truthful element to the comedy, what is it that makes the comedy work, do you think, in the studio?
Well, I'll just say that for those who maybe aren't as into the whole Hollywood world and the behind the scenes of filmmaking, I think one thing that helps it work on a more general sense is it's not technical in a way that it can't make sense to general audiences. There's enough context to understand the jargon. And again, I think you can actually learn some things from the show, just different terms and the way that films and shows are made, just different terms and the way that shows and films are made. So it's not gatekeeping in any way, and it is something that's accessible to a general audience. So I think that helps it. But the other thing I think that really sets it apart is the format. And that's something we've talked about before. It does go through different visual styles, but one thing that's really consistent throughout is this commitment to really long takes, sometimes in a way that makes an episode feel like it's a one take, even though it may not necessarily be behind the scenes. It gives you that impression. And in every episode, including the first episode, there are just these really long takes where there's no cuts. The cameras are just following these people as they're getting in and out of vehicles, as they're going in and out of different locales, as lighting's changing, and all kinds of different things are happening. And these camera people are having to adjust on the fly and get it all to look great. And it does look great. But what it does, not only just on a technical appreciation level, which I think you get innately, even if you don't notice it consciously, you understand that something different is happening here. But what it really does is for the performers, it keeps them in the moment and brings out some next level performances from these actors, because it's more like live theater, or maybe even more than that. Maybe it's like performance art that they're doing, and there just happens to be a camera there because the camera's moving in and out of different rooms and going to different locales, but you as an actor, you have to be ready for that camera to come back, and you have to be doing whatever it is that you were supposed to be doing, whether you're arguing with somebody or cleaning up a mess that Matt has made or whatever it is. These actors have to be on the whole time, and there aren't opportunities to, snicker and then say, sorry, and then jump back into it and, just throw a cut in. That's not how this works. you're in this, and if you make a mistake, it's a part of the scene now. And you see these actors pushing each other on screen, I think, to those heightened levels. And I think part of the intensity of the show, which you said it settled down, I don't know if it settles down or if we just get used to it because it feels like it stays at that level the whole time, but you just get immersed in it and you understand, okay, this is where the show's going to be for the entirety of its run. But it's really contributed to by the fact that there's no stopping and you can't get out of it. There's no cuts for you to stop and breathe. If you need a breather, you got to pause it, like you said, which is totally valid. That's fine. But for these actors, I just have to imagine being in that environment and working in that way had to bring out the best in them. And they found some really, really fun interactions throughout it that I think does set it apart and make it just rolling on the floor laughing kind of comedy, cry laughing kind of comedy for me.
And this isn't the first Seth Rogen comedy that's come to Apple Originals. Of course, Platonic is coming back very soon around. And I wonder if Seth learned anything from the production of that series, because a lot of these one takes and long shots, I think, were done on purpose and to really allow them to just go almost unedited, really, on what they're doing. And I'm sure it was probably a brave choice from Apple to be so fairly new to the scene and then kind of expose in ways Hollywood and the different trappings and just how commerce kind of corrupts the industry. I still think it's hilarious that the name of the studio head is Matt Remick, not Matt Dentler. And apparently Matt had nothing to do really with, you know, any of the behind the scenes thing. This was a very separate entity, and Matt Dentler just got to, in the end, laugh along and enjoy the series like we all did. So that's very, very cool. And I got to say, this is one of the shows that there's a lot of good comedy out there, but I tend to laugh on the inside most of the time. There isn't something that makes me laugh on the outside like the studio has. And it really has, to the point where it wasn't necessarily stress that made me pause. It was me laughing so much and having to pause so I didn't miss the next bit. And that was really, really incredible. That said, of course, there are, at least in my opinion, there are a couple of misses. One of them being a particular episode, the detective noir episode with Zac Efron called The Missing Reel. It didn't quite work for me, as much as I do appreciate that they tried to do something different on every episode. Judging by your reaction to me saying that, I think you feel a little bit different on that regard.
Yeah, you had told me the week that The Missing Reel was coming out that was one that maybe was a lower point for you throughout the season. And maybe my expectations were lower going in, but I loved that episode. I liked the way they integrated the noir element into it. They make a joke about how the narration gets inserted, but I think it's actually pretty clever the way they do it. And Ike's reaction to Matt speaking into a recorder is very, very funny. And I may be a little bit biased for this one because I was a huge fan of Zac Efron. Growing up, High School Musical hit at the perfect moment for me. I had the soundtrack. I loved all those movies. Zac Efron has always been an actor that I've really, really liked. And so seeing him on the show playing such a different version of himself than, of course, his public portrayal of, you know, being such a nice and fun guy, seeing him just taking on this very different portrayal of himself, I enjoyed that a lot. And so for me, this one worked pretty well. But I think it also speaks to the way that this show includes those different elements of Hollywood and the cameos and things like that. I think everyone finds different things in those episodes that appeals to them. And a cameo can make or break it for you, like Zac Efron did for me in this one.
Let's jump to our favourite episodes, because I think for me, there's like almost, it's tied for me, and they're bang in the middle of the season. They are The War and The Pediatric Oncologist. The War we'll get into in a second, but The Pediatric Oncologist is amazing. It's Matt Remick finally being able to step away from work and enter this different world where he goes on a date with this doctor. She goes to this like charity do where there's an auction for a golf trip and all sorts. But very quickly, Matt, and I'm not too sure if it's just because he feels uncomfortable and he's not in his usual space, but he gets very quickly into the argument that making movies is as valid and as important as curing cancer. Which, you know, there's something really funny about Matt Remick and his portrayal. I mean, I love Seth Rogen anyway. I just think he's so likable on screen and he is disarming in so many ways. And there is a part of Matt Remick's character that I wouldn't say it's horrible. He loves movies, right? He loves celluloid, he loves auteurs, but he's really got no backbone, and he's almost tunnel visioned in a sense because everything is so make and break for him. He can't make this art because he's so attached to keeping that seat as well. He's basically insufferable, but he's not a bad person. And because of that, and because of the episodes running up to it, where, you know, you and I, we had our heads in our hands on multiple moments during this season. But because of that, I kind of forgave him through this. And I almost thought back to being in a similar situation where I was completely out of my comfort zone on a date. And I ended up screwing things up and talking about things that I didn't really know about, just to kind of fit in and deal with that lack of confidence and that anxiety. And I think that's exactly what happens here. And yeah, I mean, the date turns into a bit of a disaster. A bit like The War, which is a fantastic episode. A bit of a cat and mouse game of stitch-ups that end with the throw of a burrito and a shocking set disaster at the hands of Sal Serpestine and Quinn Hackett. But Sal has a big moment, and I think that big moment's your favourite episode of this season.
Yeah, my favorite has to be the Golden Globes episode where they recreated the award show. Matt spends the entire episode just trying to get someone to mention him in their acceptance speech because that's just a dream of his. And of course, he's not self-aware enough to keep that to himself. He has to express it. But what I loved about the episode was, of course, the cameos, incredible cameos, but also the twist of fate on Matt, where Sal gets so many shout-outs throughout the Golden Globes. And by the third time someone mentioned Sal from the stage, I was pretty much cry laughing watching Matt's face and his reaction to it. So it was a great episode. And the series as a whole, very, very strong. I could have easily gone with Pediatric Oncologist as well because that episode was great. But I'd say all of these are very strong and worth checking out. But the Golden Globes rises to the top for me.
And in terms of our favourite characters, where do you want to go with that?
Well, I think I know where you're going based on your second favorite episode. But I want to shout out Patty, played by Catherine O'Hara, who's the former studio head who ends up sticking around longer than I expected her to. I was afraid she was just going to be a one-and-done guest star, which would have been very disappointing for me because Catherine O'Hara is someone I've also been a fan of for a long time since she was the mom in Home Alone. And again, a very different character for her here, but one that I enjoyed a lot. The way they keep her around, she goes from studio head to getting fired, but then she gets into this very lucrative producer deal and actually ends up in probably a better place than Matt does, honestly, because she's actually able to do the art that she wants to do, and she starts getting recognition, which is very cool. And I just love her relationship with Matt, the way they can go from kind of commiserating to screaming at each other to a very tense partnership all in one conversation. And then they just continue to have these very intense interactions with one another. And she's like this alternate future for Matt that I think he almost longs for because the job that he ends up in, as much as he dreamed of it, it isn't exactly what he thought it would be. And she gets that creative freedom. So I love her in juxtaposition to him. And I love the way that they kept her around. And so Patty's my favorite character. But what about you?
I mean, just very quickly sticking on Patty for a second, the oneer. She was the one that was in control whilst Matt is trying to get that recognition from one of his favourite directors and ends up ruining the whole thing. Just a fascinating and hilarious example of Catherine O'Hara's comedy chops. Of course, we've seen her in dramatic roles as well as of late in The Last of Us, especially. But yeah, just hilarious. To me, honestly, you know, we talked about the Golden Globes episode and the war, but my favourite characters, because I couldn't pick one, were South Silverstein and Quinn Hackett, played by Ike Barinholtz and Chase V. Wonders, who has really kind of broken out the mould over the last couple of years. They are just such great sparring partners, and it's hard to separate them. But what I love also is how their backstories are explored. You know, you've got Chase V. Wonders, who she knows so much about what people want to see, but is ignored pretty much at every hurdle, and she has to force her way in. And the war is just like the perfect example of this and how things go awry. But then you've got Ike Barinholtz, who, again, we saw in The After Party not that long ago, was fantastic in that comedy for Apple. But in this, he has such a heightened role. And what I love is how they explore his relationship with his daughters, who are really an example of the next generation, Gen Z, and being glued to TikTok and not really understanding or caring about film or the people that make those films. It's just content really to them, and he's having to deal with that side of things being so close to home to him. I'm sure he, like most people in Hollywood, wanted to be the next Nepo baby dad, but it doesn't seem to be working out for him. And I really hope that both of those characters are further explored in what we already know to be confirmed, a second season of the studio. I'll also be interested to see just how meta that second season goes. Of course, Matt Bellamy from The Town is featured in the series. And there's a special The Town podcast that we'll link in the show notes as well, going over the studio and some of the behind the scenes for the series. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts?
I'll just say this show is very special. There are so many moments throughout it where you're like, oh, I can't believe they got them. But I think it speaks to what the show is doing, that so many people in Hollywood have been willing to participate. And I think that while this is a comedy that works really well, it's also a very effective satire, and one that we need right now, and one that's worth checking out. So yeah, I hope people will watch the studio and anticipate its second season. I'm happy that it's coming back. But it's something very special, something that needs to be celebrated, and I've enjoyed doing that with you today, Sigmund. It's a show that I've really, really enjoyed.
Well, the studio, my favourite Apple original, and I wouldn't even say Apple original, but streaming original so far in 2025, is now streaming in full on Apple TV Plus in anticipation of its second season return, at which point I think we'll have watched the show at least another half dozen times. So, yeah. Fantastic stuff. Get into it if you haven't already.
Well, of course, we encourage everyone to check out the studio and all of this week's Apple original releases. But of course, there are a ton of other releases through the TV app this week, Sigmund. So share with us your TV app highlights.
The last couple of weeks have been filled with quality, of course. This week is no different, or at least that's the promise. We start with Prime Video's The Better Sister. It's based on the novel by best-selling author Alastair Burke, and it's an 8-episode thriller limited series exploring the terrible things that drive sisters apart and ultimately bring them back together, with Jessica Biel playing Chloe, a high-profile media executive living in a picturesque life with her handsome lawyer husband Adam and teenager son Ethan, whilst her estranged sister Nikki, played by Elizabeth Banks, struggles to make ends meet and stay clean. But when Adam is brutally murdered, the prime suspect sends shockwaves through the family, reuniting the two sisters as they try to untangle a complicated family history to discover the truth behind his death. So this is one that I'm really, really looking forward to. Of course, Elizabeth Banks, known for her comedy output, but even better still is her dramatic output. So really looking forward to this. And if that wasn't enough, I know we've been talking about Prime Video a lot over the last few weeks, but the output continues and it's so varied because my next pick is Good Boy, also on Prime Video. This is a Korean action comedy series written by Lee Dae-il, directed by Shim Na-yoon, and actor Park Bo-gum's latest project. It follows Olympic medalists who have fallen on hard times only to join the police force for a special recruitment program, trading medals for badges as they tackle violent crimes and injustices by using their athletic skills.
It's a very interesting concept for a series. I guess I could imagine like an Olympic distance runner being good at chases. Maybe that's the kind of thing they're going for, but like a swimmer, are they going to be catching somebody by sea? Be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, very interesting concept for a series. And both of these make me think I really need to re-up my Prime Video subscription. I canceled it because I wasn't using the shipping and stuff like that. But of course, they have a video subscription as well, separate from the full Amazon Prime. I need to look into that and get back caught up on some of these shows like these too.
I think so. I think that's a good idea. Now, of course, also available to stream, loads of films. Fight or Flight is available right now on PVOD. It's about a mercenary that takes on the job of tracking down a target on a plane, but must then protect her when she's surrounded by people trying to kill both of them. It stars Josh Hartnett, who has had something of a re-emergence of late, and he's performed nearly all of his own stunts during the film's intense 25-day shoot, probably taking some calls there from Tom Cruise along the way. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to checking this one out. It's got several major fight sequences that ended with Josh Hartnett bruised from head to toe. And the story unfolds on a flight from Bangkok to San Francisco, with the production including building a life-size replica plane, another 4D experience for any upcoming flights you may have after, of course, last week's finale of The Rehearsal on HBO Max, which if you have not checked out, you need to check out that series because it is wild and I was not expecting that finale. You really have to put some trust in the makers of that show. And finally, for me, in terms of highlights, The Seed of the Sacred Fig is now streaming on Hulu. It's from Mohammed Rasulov, and the film follows Iman, an investigating judge in the revolutionary court in Tehran, who grapples with mistrust and paranoia as nationwide political protests intensify and his gun mysteriously disappears. Suspecting the involvement of his wife and his daughters, he imposes drastic measures at home, causing tensions to rise. Step by step, social norms and the rules of family life are being suspended, and this film, which is a very important film that I wanted to highlight this week, it premiered at the 2024 Cannes Film Festival. The film received a nearly 15-minute standing ovation and was honoured with multiple awards, including the Special Jury Prize. And following the film's release, lead actress Sohaila Golestani faced legal consequences in Iran for her involvement in the film and her activism, including a sentence of 74 lashes. Other cast members, such as Satura Maleki, Mohassa Rostami, and Niusha Akshi, were compelled to flee Iran due to their participation in the project. And, well, this is one that I think all audiences, as tough as a watch this may be, is one that you're going to be compelled to spend a few hours with and many days, weeks and months thinking about. Also streaming this week are Captain America Brave New World on Disney+, alongside Dogman on Peacock. So we're ending on something a little lighthearted, and well, I think we're continuing that with our Up Next picks this week.
Yes, my Up Next pick this week is something very inconsequential, but I think a nice little break sometimes from some of the news in the world and things that we do need to pay attention to, but we also need a bit of levity as well. So my pick is The Quiz with Balls on Fox. It's a quiz show. You know, I'm a sucker for a quiz show, but this combines elements of trivia with what I can only describe as the balls from Wipeout, if you remember that series back in the day. So you're on a team and you're answering questions, but if you get the questions wrong, then your teammates are hit by these giant rolling rubber balls and knocked into pools of water.
Perfect.
So it's hosted by Jay Farrow. It's silly. It's actually in its second season, which is surprising. I missed its first season, but this looks like a lot of fun, just something to kick back and watch. Who doesn't love to watch people get knocked into water and get mad at each other over getting the questions wrong? If that sounds like something that would be interesting to you, the season kicks off Monday on Fox and Tuesday on Hulu.
Well, before that pick kicks off, I've got something that's premiering on Sunday on Max, or is that HBO Max? Who knows? I think it's Max until this later in the summer, then it's HBO Max. But hey, Mountainhead is a HBO original on Max and a new satire and directorial debut from Jesse Armstrong, the creator of Succession. And this tells the story of a group of billionaire friends who get together against the backdrop of a rolling international crisis. Sound familiar? Well, it probably should. This stars Steve Carell, Jason Schwartzman, Corey Michael Smith, Rami Youssef, Hadley Robinson, Andy Daly, Ali Kincaid, Daniel Oreskes, and David Tom. And what's really interesting about this is it's a comedy that was filmed in just 5 days, with Armstrong pitching the idea in December, followed by a script completely written and filmed in March. Also, it features a score from Nicholas Brittle, another collaboration, of course, because he is known for his iconic work on Succession. So I'm looking forward to hearing the score to Mountainhead when the HBO original debuts this Sunday on Max. And later HBO Max.
It never gets old, Sigmund. Oh, there are some more picks for you to check out this week. Lots and lots to watch. But that's all from us for this week. Of course, thanks so much for listening. We very much appreciate it, and we want to hear from you. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes, or you can reach out via our contact form, which is also linked in the show notes.
We'll be back next week to highlight new Apple original golf comedy Stick and share our prediction cards ahead of Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference 2025. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.